The Kyoto Protocol, written by Roger G. Trow, narrated by Steve Miller. Prologue. In the year 2050, peace had been established in most of the war-plagued arenas of war of the early 21st century. Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan were finally free of the invading foreigners that had sought to impose Western-style democracies upon their societies. For their part, the Western nations decided to let them get on with it, and proceeded to cut off all further overseas aid to them in favor of their own home needs. A period of peace and prosperity seemed a real possibility at last. Without the inflationary budgets fueling foreign wars, and because the Chinese suddenly stopped buying up American debt bonds, the USA was unable to service the huge debt burden incurred 40 years previously. The bankruptcy of the USA was finally acknowledged, and the financial markets shifted away from the once almighty dollar to the newly stabilized euro. The United States entered a period of severe economic depression and lost political influence. The political leverage of the USA was taken up by China and Europe, and an uneasy balance of power now existed between the new paymasters. Europe established a technological lead over China, due mainly to the British, who had finally cracked the problem of cold fusion. As a result, free and abundant energy was available throughout the European Community nations, now known as the Eurozone, but the technology was restricted to member nations only. Asia continued to be plagued by limited resources and growing populations, and China eyed its neighbors' assets variously. But all that was about to change. In May 2050, massive tectonic activity erupted along both the Pacific Ring of Fire and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The Asian activity began with an enormous earthquake, probably magnitude 11 on the open-ended Richter scale. It occurred at a shallow depth of 10 kilometers, with an epicenter just off the Indonesian coast. The quake was all the more destructive because of its shallowness. Similar quakes of a high order of magnitude followed within hours along the length of the entire western boundary between the Pacific Plate and the Eurasian Plate. It is supposed that the cause of the earthquakes was the release of stress as the plates collided instead of sliding smoothly past each other. The earthquake damage was extremely severe in those cities closest to the epicenters that lay close to the coastline. The earthquakes also generated multiple and most severe tsunamis, because the epicenters of most of the quakes lay at the comparatively shallow depths of between 10 and 15 kilometers. The resulting multiple tsunamis then raced across the whole of the Pacific Ocean and devastated almost every coastal community that lay on the Pacific Ocean. Whole communities just simply disappeared, and this was especially true along the USA's densely populated west coast, where the coastal cities were completely inundated, and they were destroyed by the huge waves and sympathetic movements of the San Andreas fault system. The devastating power of the tsunamis reached as far south as Chile. 24 hours later, along the Marianas Trench and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, seismic activity sensors started registering signs that a major seismic event was about to occur. The U.S. Coast and the Geodetic Service put out alerts that predicted there would be imminent major tectonic movements and earthquakes. They were correct. A previously unknown flume situated right under the Mid-Atlantic Ridge raised the ridge by 20 meters, and this combined with the large slip along the Marianas Trench. This type of activity was not predicted, because plate movements in this region until now had been slow and seabed levels had been steadily adjusting for centuries. It was the combination of these events that created a second series of tsunamis, which raced across the Atlantic Ocean in both easterly and westerly directions. The tidal waves generated by the Atlantic events reached a height of 60 meters upon landfall. The westerly tsunamis and waves inundated the length of the eastern seaboard of the USA, totally destroying several cities, including Boston, New York, and Washington, with destructions on a massive scale even as far south as Florida. Thus, in 24 hours, in a nightmarish worst-case scenario, twin sets of catastrophes dismantled the industrial might of Eastern Asia and America. The effects were felt along the whole of the European Atlantic coastline, too. Ireland bore the brunt of the killer waves first, and then
Sample complete. Ready to continue?